The ER didn't go silent because of a flat line. It went silent because the hospital switchboard rang, and the operator went pale before answering. Her fingers trembled as she mouthed two words no one in the building ever expected to hear NORAD command. Minutes earlier, a woman in scrubs had been escorted out of the trauma bay. Her badge flagged her access revoked by the ER director himself. No shouting, no resistance, just a quiet nod as she stepped aside while lives hung in the balance. Now every monitor kept beeping, every breath in the ER felt held, and every pair of eyes turned toward the phone. NORAD wasn't asking about a patient. They weren't calling administration. They were asking for her. And suddenly the question wasn't why she'd been banned from the trauma bay, but how a hospital director had made the most dangerous mistake of his career. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. And if you're drawn to stories where power is tested, silence speaks loudest, and justice arrives without warning, make sure to subscribe. This one starts quiet, but it doesn't stay that way. Street. Catherine's Medical Center sat just off the interstate, a sprawling level I trauma hospital that never truly slept. At any given hour, ambulances lined the bay, helicopters hovered overhead, and the emergency department pulsed with a rhythm known only to those who lived inside it long enough to stop hearing the noise. Inside, the ER hierarchy mattered. Badges were color-coded. Titles were spoken carefully. Decisions flowed in one direction downward from the office of Dr. Harold Whitman, the ER director. Whitman was a man who believed chaos could be tamed if it was controlled tightly enough. Mid-50s, impeccably groomed, white coat always pressed, he had built his reputation on order, protocol, authority. He did not raise his voice often, but when he did, the entire department snapped into line. To Whitman, medicine was not just about saving lives. It was about control under pressure and being seen as the one who held it. That was why he noticed her almost immediately. Dr. Elena Carter didn't stand out the way most newcomers did. She didn't announce herself. She didn't try to impress. Her scrubs were standard issue, her badge unremarkable. She spoke softly, moved efficiently, and kept her head down. Too down, Whitman thought. She had transferred from a smaller facility 3 states away. Her file, when it crossed his desk, had been thin. No glowing letters of recommendation. No elite hospital names highlighted in bold. Just solid credentials, clean records, and a resume that looked almost intentionally modest. Why would someone like her come here? He had asked his assistant. No one had an answer. Elena's first week passed quietly. She worked overnight shifts, took the cases others avoided, and never once complained. Nurses noticed she listened more than she spoke. Residents noticed she asked questions that cut straight to the core of a problem. And then there were the hands. Steady, unshaking, calm, even when alarms screamed and blood hit the floor. During a multi-vehicle collision, one rainy Tuesday night, an unconscious patient had been rushed in with internal bleeding and dropping blood pressure. The trauma team scrambled. Voices overlapped. Orders collided. Elena stepped forward, not loudly, not forcefully, and placed a hand on the gurney. "Pressure's not responding because the bleed isn't where you think it is," she said calmly. A resident bristled. "We're following protocol." "I know," Elena replied. "That's why it's failing." She pointed to the imaging screen, highlighting a detail most had missed. A pause followed, a tense one. Then the attending made the call to adjust. The patient stabilized. No applause followed. No acknowledgement. Elena simply stepped back into place as if nothing unusual had happened. But Whitman had been watching from the observation window. He didn't like what he saw. It wasn't that she had been wrong, she hadn't. It was that she had been right without asking permission, that she had influenced a decision without authority, that people had listened. In Whitman's world, competence was acceptable. Influence without rank was not. By the end of the week, whispers started circulating. "Who is she really? She doesn't act like someone from a county hospital." "Did you see how she handled that bleed?" Elena heard the whispers. "She always did, but she never fed them." She clocked in, did her job, and left without lingering in the break room or building alliances. That restraint, more than anything, unsettled Whitman. He called for her file again. This time he read it slower. Education solid. Certifications extensive. Past employment vague. There were gaps. Not red flags, just absences. Periods of time marked only with generalized descriptions, consulting temporary assignment medical advisory role. Advisory to whom Whitman muttered. He asked HR for clarification. They came back empty-handed. It's all verified, they said. Background check came back clean. Whitman didn't like clean answers that left too many questions. The following night, another critical case came in a construction accident. A man had fallen nearly 30 feet, crushing his chest and pelvis. Trauma Bay 1 filled instantly. Whitman stood at the head of the room, directing traffic like a conductor. The team moved fast, but stress mounted quickly. The patient's oxygen levels dropped. One lung wasn't expanding. Elena stepped closer, eyes locked on the monitor. "He's developing a tension pneumothorax," she said quietly. "We don't have time to wait." Whitman didn't look at her. "We're stabilizing. He'll crash before we finish prepping," she replied. Still calm, still controlled. Whitman finally turned. "Dr. Carter, you are not leading this case." "I'm not trying to," Elena said. "I'm trying to keep him alive." The room froze. No one spoke. Everyone felt it, the subtle shift, the challenge without defiance. Whitman's jaw tightened. "Step back," he ordered. Elena hesitated for half a second. Then she stepped back. The procedure was delayed by 3 minutes. The patient crashed. They brought him back, but barely. Later, as staff cleaned the bay and the adrenaline faded, Whitman replayed the moment in his mind. He told himself the outcome would have been the same. That protocol existed for a reason, but a small, unwelcome voice whispered otherwise. By morning, his decision was made. Elena Carter was becoming a problem not because she broke rules, but because she exposed how fragile authority became under real pressure. Whitman summoned her to his office just before shift change. The office overlooked the ER through thick glass. From here, everything looked orderly, controlled. "You're skilled," Whitman said, folding his hands. "But this department runs on structure." "I understand," Elena replied. "Do you?" he asked. "Because you've inserted yourself into multiple critical decisions without clearance." "I spoke when lives were at risk," she said evenly. "That is not your call," Whitman snapped. He caught himself and lowered his voice. "Effective immediately, your access to the trauma bay is limited. You will not participate in high-level trauma cases until further review." Elena absorbed the words without visible reaction. "If that's your decision," she said quietly. Whitman frowned. He had expected protest, excuses, something. Instead, Elena stood, nodded once, and walked out. From behind the glass, Whitman watched her disappear into the controlled chaos of the ER. What he didn't see was the way several nurses exchanged uneasy looks, or how one resident clenched his jaw in silence, or how down the hall an incoming alert flashed on the trauma board, one that would test every decision Whitman had just made. The alert came in at 6:42 p.m., just as the evening shift began to swell the ER with its usual controlled chaos. Multiple vehicle collision. Highway 81. Possible hazmat exposure. ETA 8 minutes. The trauma board lit up with names, roles, and assignments. Trauma Bay 1 and 2 were activated. Respiratory therapy mobilized. Blood bank was notified. The familiar machine of emergency response roared to life. Except this time, one name was missing. Elena Carter stood at the nurse's station watching the board update in real time. Her badge still scanned. Her credentials still valid. But the subtle line that mattered most, the one that opened the trauma bay doors, was no longer hers. She felt it like a pressure change the way she used to feel, altitude shifts before alarms ever sounded. Across the room, Dr. Whitman took command. "Let's move," he said sharply. "I want full imaging on arrival. No deviations unless cleared by me." People nodded. Pens scratched. Gurneys rolled. No one looked at Elena. She turned away before the silence could weigh on her. The first ambulance arrived, screaming brakes hissing as it skidded into the bay. Paramedics burst through the doors with a man in his 40s, blood soaking through a makeshift bandage at his abdomen. His vitals were unstable, his breathing shallow. Behind him came a second patient, then a third. The ER flooded. From her position just outside Trauma Bay 1, Elena watched the choreography unfold. She saw what others didn't, not because she was smarter, but because she wasn't caught in the hierarchy of voices competing for control. The first patient's chest rose unevenly. The second had a chemical burn spreading across his neck. The third, barely conscious, kept trying to sit up, oxygen saturation dropping by the second. Inside the bay, orders collided. Get a line in him, BP's crashing. Prep for intubation. Elena's fingers curled slightly at her sides. She recognized the pattern forming the cascade that followed when early signs were missed because everyone was focused on the loudest problem in the room. She stepped forward, stopping just short of the threshold. His airways compromised, she said to the nearest nurse, keeping her voice low. He inhaled something corrosive. The nurse hesitated. Dr. Whitman, didn't I know? Elena said gently. Just watch his neck. The nurse did. Inside trauma bay, 2 alarms spiked. A resident swore under his breath. Someone shouted for more suction. Whitman's voice cut through it all. Stay focused. 1 patient at a time. Elena closed her eyes for half a second. That was the mistake. Time passed in seconds that felt longer than minutes. 1 patient stabilized. Another worsened. Sweat ran down backs beneath sterile gowns. Then it happened. The man with the chemical burns convulsed violently, his airway swelling shut faster than anyone anticipated. Airway obstruction, someone yelled. Panic rippled. Get anesthesia. They're tied up. Whitman rushed over, eyes scanning, calculating. Prep for emergency intubation. Elena didn't think. She stepped forward. Cricothyrotomy, she said. Clear. Certain. Now. Whitman spun. You are not cleared to. He won't survive intubation, Elena snapped, not loud but sharp enough to cut through the noise, his airways collapsing. You have under 30 seconds. The room froze. This was the moment Whitman had feared and anticipated all at once, the challenge in front of witnesses. The test of authority. You're overstepping, he said, voice cold. Step back. Elena met his eyes. In that instant, Whitman saw something he hadn't before. Not defiance, not arrogance. Urgency, and something deeper, experience forged where hesitation cost lives in ways this room had never seen. But pride spoke louder. Security, Whitman said. Get her out of here. 2 orderlies moved. The patient convulsed again. His oxygen dropped into the red. 30 seconds, Elena repeated, already reaching for a tray that wasn't hers to touch. Security grabbed her arm. The airway closed. The patient flatlined. Chaos exploded. Whitman shouted orders, but they came too late. They cut into the airway eventually. Sloppy, rushed, delayed. The patient was resuscitated after 4 minutes. 4 minutes too long. When it was over, the room stood in stunned silence, broken only by the mechanical hiss of oxygen. Whitman exhaled sharply, straightening his coat. Clear the bay, he said. Document everything. Security escorted Elena into the hallway. She didn't resist. She didn't argue. As they walked, she stared straight ahead, jaw set, breathing controlled. But inside, the weight settled heavy. She had known this would happen, had tried to avoid it, had hoped restraint would be enough. It never was. Whitman followed them out. You're done, he said, loud enough for staff nearby to hear. Your access to the trauma bay is revoked entirely, effective immediately. A murmur spread. Elena stopped. Slowly, she turned. You made a call, she said quietly. Now you'll live with it. Whitman scoffed. You don't get to threaten me. I'm not, Elena replied. I'm warning you. Security pushed her toward the doors. Across the ER, nurses avoided Whitman's eyes. A resident stared at the floor, fists clenched. Then, somewhere far from the trauma bays, from a quiet room lined with switches and monitors, the hospital switchboard rang. Once, twice. The operator answered casually. Her expression changed instantly. Street Catherine's Medical Center, she said. How may I direct your call? A pause. Her face drained of color. Yes, she whispered. 1 moment, please. She covered the receiver with a shaking hand and looked up at her supervisor. They're asking for someone by name, she said. What department? The supervisor asked. The operator swallowed. They said, NORAD Command. And they weren't asking for Dr. Whitman. The switchboard office was never supposed to feel important. It was a narrow room tucked behind administration, filled with outdated monitors, blinking indicator lights, and a constant low hum of routing systems. Most days, the biggest decisions made there were whether to transfer a call to billing or patient records. Today, the air felt heavier. The operator, a woman who had worked the board for nearly 20 years, held the phone like it might shock her. "They're still on the line," she whispered to her supervisor. "They won't give a callback number. They said this channel is secure." "What did they say exactly?" the supervisor asked. The operator swallowed. "They said, 'This is NORAD command. We require immediate confirmation of Dr. Elena Carter's location and status.'" The supervisor blinked. "NORAD, as in yes," the operator said. "That NORAD." Down in the ER, Elena Carter was standing near the exit doors, her badge already flagged red on the scanner. Security lingered nearby, unsure whether to escort her fully out or wait for further instruction. She felt the shift before anyone spoke to her. It wasn't instinct. It was pattern recognition. Her phone, kept on silent, buried deep in her bag, vibrated once. She didn't reach for it. Across the department, Doctor. Harold Whitman was issuing instructions in clipped tones, trying to reassert control. He felt eyes on him, though no one openly challenged him now. That was the thing about authority. Once cracked, it didn't shatter loudly. It fractured quietly, spreading beneath the surface. A charge nurse approached Whitman cautiously. "Sir, there's a call. Administration says it's urgent." Whitman didn't look up from the chart he was signing. "I'm busy. They said it's federal." That got his attention. "What agency?" he asked. The nurse hesitated. "They wouldn't say. Just, they want you near the switchboard." Whitman straightened his coat. "Fine." As he walked, he passed Elena without looking at her. She watched him go, her expression unreadable. The switchboard office felt suddenly too small for Whitman's presence. He filled the doorway, shoulders squared, authority radiating from every practiced movement. "I'm Dr. Harold Whitman," he said curtly. "ER director. I understand there's a call." The operator nodded and held out the receiver with both hands. Whitman took it, irritation already lining his voice. "This is Dr. Whitman." A pause. Then Whitman's expression changed, not dramatically, but subtly. The way a man's face does when he realizes the ground beneath him isn't as solid as he believed. "Yes," he said slowly. "This is a civilian medical facility." Another pause. Longer this time. "No," Whitman said. "Dr. Carter is not authorized." He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes flicked to the supervisor, then to the operator, then back to the phone. "I see." He said the word tight. "Yes, she is currently on site." The voice on the other end spoke again. Whitman listened without interruption, his jaw tightening with each second. "Yes," he repeated. "I understand." He hung up without ceremony. The room remained silent. "What was that about?" the supervisor asked carefully. Whitman didn't answer immediately. He handed the phone back, fingers stiff. "I need Dr. Carter," he said finally. Immediately, back in the ER, Elena felt the change ripple through the space before Whitman reached her. Security stepped aside without being told. Whitman stopped a few feet away, eyes searching her face, not for guilt, not for defiance, but for confirmation of something he didn't yet understand. "Administration says you're needed," he said. Elena studied him for a moment. "Who called?" she asked. Whitman hesitated. Then, reluctantly, NORAD. The word landed like a dropped instrument in a silent room. Elena closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there was no surprise there, only acceptance. "They didn't call you by accident," she said quietly. Whitman bristled. "You don't get to dictate." "I'm not," Elena interrupted, her tone steady. "I'm explaining." Around them, staff pretended not to listen while hearing every word. Whitman lowered his voice. "Why would NORAD be calling a hospital switchboard asking for you, Elena?" Didn't answer right away. "Because she said finally something happened today that crossed a line bigger than this hospital." Whitman stared at her, searching for exaggeration. He found none. They walked together toward administration, not side by side, but not quite separate either. The balance had shifted and both of them felt it. Inside a small conference room, Elena finally retrieved her phone. She unlocked it with a thumbprint and checked the missed alert. One encrypted message, time-stamped 12 minutes earlier. "Stand by. Do not escalate. We are making contact." Whitman watched her read it. "Is that from them?" he asked. "Yes." "What exactly is your relationship with NORAD?" Whitman demanded. Elena looked up at him, then really looked at him. You banned me from the trauma bay because I didn't fit into your structure, she said calmly. That's your right as director. But you made that call without understanding the scope of who you were overruling. Whitman flushed. I overruled a doctor who disobeyed protocol. You overruled a federal medical asset, Elena replied. One assigned to high-casualty contingency response. The words hung in the air. Whitman laughed once, sharp, disbelieving. That's not possible. If that were true, it would be in your file. No, Elena said. It wouldn't. She stood, posture straight, voice even. My civilian file is intentionally incomplete. My clearance doesn't transfer through HR. Whitman felt a chill creep up his spine. Clearance. Before Elena could respond, the intercom crackled overhead. Dr. Whitman, a voice said. You're needed at the switchboard again. They're asking for Dr. Carter directly now. Elena picked up her bag. This is the part where you decide, she said softly. You can keep fighting for control, or you can let me do what I was trained to do. Whitman swallowed. Outside, the sound of rotors began to echo faintly in the distance, not landing yet, but close enough to be unmistakable. Whatever he had tried to suppress, whatever authority he had leaned on too heavily was no longer confined to his department. It had reached something much larger, and it was calling back. The sound of rotors grew louder by the second. At first, it blended into the background noise of the city, distant traffic wind rushing between buildings, but then the glass panels along the ER corridor began to tremble. A low, rhythmic thump rolled through the structure, vibrating light fixtures and sending a ripple of unease through everyone who felt it. People looked up instinctively. That's not med transport, someone murmured. Elena Carter paused near the administrative hallway, her bag slung over one shoulder. She didn't look toward the helipad. She didn't need to. The sound told her everything she needed to know. Whitman walked beside her, his stride stiff, his mind racing faster than his feet. He had spent his career mastering the predictable, the flowcharts, the protocols, the clear chains of command. This wasn't predictable. This wasn't medicine as he understood it. You're telling me, he said under his breath, that you answer to the Department of Defense. Elena stopped walking. I'm telling you I answer to the mission, she said. Sometimes that mission overlaps with medicine. Sometimes it doesn't. Whitman opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. The rotors were louder now, close enough that the windows rattled visibly. A nurse hurried toward them. Sir, security's asking if we're locking down the roof. Whitman hesitated. Elena answered for him. No lockdown. Clear the helipad. Keep civilian staff back 50 feet. The nurse blinked. Do we have authority for that? Elena met her eyes. You will in about 30 seconds. The nurse looked to Whitman. For the first time since he'd taken the director's chair, Whitman felt the weight of uncertainty press down on him. He could countermand her. He could reassert control. Instead, he nodded once. Do it, he said. The nurse ran. Whitman turned back to Elena. If this is some kind of misunderstanding, it isn't, Elena said quietly. The switchboard phone rang again. This time, Whitman didn't answer it. Elena did. She didn't say hello. She didn't identify herself. She simply listened, her posture straightening slightly with each word spoken on the other end. Yes, she said. I'm on site. A pause. No casualties beyond what you already know, she continued. One near miss. Civilian command interference. Whitman flinched at the phrasing. Yes, Elena said again. I understand. I'll comply. She ended the call and slid the phone back into her pocket. They're landing, she said. Not for me. For verification. Verification of what Whitman asked. Elena looked at him, and for a moment something almost like sympathy crossed her face. Of consequences, she replied. The helicopter descended onto the hospital roof with a force that sent a shockwave through the building. Dust and loose debris whipped across the helipad. Security officers held their positions, shielding their eyes as the aircraft settled. The doors slid open. Two men stepped out first, both in civilian attire but moving with unmistakable military precision. No rank insignia, no visible weapons. But everything about them, from the way they scanned the perimeter to the way they spoke into concealed microphones, marked them as something far removed from hospital administration. Behind them came a third figure, older, calm, unhurried. He wore a dark jacket, no uniform, no badges on display. Only a small pin at the lapel, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what to look for. Elena did. She waited at the stairwell entrance as they descended from the roof. When the older man reached her, he stopped. "Dr. Carter," he said. "Yes, sir." "Did we interrupt?" he asked, glancing around the ER hallway. Elena's mouth twitched. "You arrived right on time." He nodded, then turned his attention to Whitman, who stood a few steps back, hands clasped tightly in front of him. "And you must be the director," the man said. Whitman straightened. "Dr. Harold Whitman, ER director." The man studied him for a moment, not with hostility, not with judgment, but with the cool assessment of someone used to evaluating risk. "I'm Daniel Hargrove," he said. "You won't find my title on Google." Whitman forced a smile. "How can I help you, Mr. Hargrove?" Hargrove didn't return the smile. "You can start by explaining why a federally designated medical asset was barred from performing trauma interventions during an active mass casualty response." The words hit like a blow. Whitman's mouth went dry. "I wasn't aware. That's the problem," Hargrove interrupted calmly. "You weren't aware, and you didn't ask." Elena stood silently, hands folded behind her back. "We're not here to take over your hospital," Hargrove continued. "We're here to understand how close we came to losing someone because of a breakdown in cooperation." Whitman felt every eye in the hallway on him. Nurses, doctors, security, all watching as the balance of power shifted in real time. "I acted within my authority," Whitman said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Authority without context is liability," Hargrove replied. "And liability is my department." He turned to Elena. "Report." Elena spoke without embellishment. She detailed the sequence of events, the decisions made, the time lost. She did not accuse. She did not dramatize. She simply told the truth. When she finished, Hargrove nodded once. "Thank you." He turned back to Whitman. "Effective immediately. Dr. Carter's trauma bay access is reinstated. Any further restriction requires federal review." Whitman swallowed hard. "This is still a civilian facility, and she is still a civilian physician," Hargrove said. "But when national readiness intersects with civilian care, we coordinate. We don't compete." Whitman's shoulders sagged slightly. "What happens now?" Hargrove glanced toward the trauma bays where monitors still beeped steadily. "Now she finishes the job you tried to stop her from doing." Elena moved before Whitman could respond. As she pushed through the trauma bay doors, the room shifted. Conversations stopped. Hands stilled. Every person inside felt it, the return of something they hadn't realized they were missing. Clarity. Elena moved with purpose, issuing calm, precise instructions. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't reference the helicopter, the officials, or the call that had changed everything. She focused on the patient. Within minutes, the room found its rhythm again. Outside, Whitman watched through the glass as the team worked under Elena's quiet command. For the first time, he saw it clearly, not a threat to his authority, but the cost of his pride. Hargrove stepped beside him. "Medicine isn't a battlefield," Whitman said softly. "No," Hargrove agreed. "But egos still get people killed." Whitman didn't reply. Inside the trauma bay, Elena made a final adjustment. The patient's vitals stabilized. Another life pulled back from the edge. And this time no one questioned who was in charge. The trauma bay didn't erupt into applause when the patient stabilized. It never did. Instead, there was the quieter release. The subtle slowing of hands, the way shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. The sound of someone finally exhaling after holding their breath too long. Monitors settled into steadier rhythms. Blood-stained gauze was peeled away and replaced. Orders softened from shouts to confirmations. Elena Carter stepped back from the gurney, eyes still scanning mind, already moving ahead to the next variable that could unravel what they'd just regained. She didn't look at the glass. She knew Whitman was there. She could feel it the same way she felt pressure changes before storms present, unavoidable but no longer controlling her movement. "ICU transfer in 5, she said. "Keep him warm. Watch for rebound hypotension." "Yes, doctor," the nurse replied without hesitation. The words landed differently this time. Outside the bay, Whitman stood, rigid arms folded tightly across his chest. He had watched countless procedures through that same glass over the years, had seen miracles pulled from the brink, and failures accepted with professional stoicism, but he had never watched himself become irrelevant so quickly. Hargrove remained beside him silent, letting the moment do its work. "You don't enjoy this," Whitman said at last. "Enjoy," Hargrove echoed. This Whitman gestured vaguely toward the trauma bay. "Showing up, undermining my authority." Hargrove studied him. "If I wanted to undermine you, Doctor Whitman, this hallway would be a very different place right now." Whitman frowned. "Then why are you here? Because your hospital sits in a geographic corridor that matters," Hargrove said. "And because Dr. Carter does too." Whitman turned sharply. "She didn't tell me any of this." "She wasn't supposed to," Hargrove replied. "Her work depends on not being noticed." Whitman scoffed softly. "That's convenient." Hargrove didn't rise to it. "It's necessary." Inside the trauma bay, Elena finished her checks and finally looked up. Her gaze met Whitman's through the glass. No challenge, no triumph, just a quiet acknowledgement. Whitman felt something twist in his chest. After the patient was transferred upstairs, the ER settled into an uneasy lull. The immediate crisis had passed, but the ripple effects were only beginning. Word spread fast. A helicopter, federal officials, NORAD. Staff whispered in corners. Phones buzzed in pockets. The story changed, with every retelling growing sharper, more dramatic. Elena felt it following her as she washed her hands as she updated charts as she walked down the corridor toward the staff lounge. She didn't stop it. She never had. In the lounge, she poured herself a cup of coffee she wouldn't finish. She leaned against the counter, eyes unfocused, letting the adrenaline drain from her system the way she'd learned to do long ago. The door opened behind her. Whitman entered alone. The room felt smaller instantly. "I won't interrupt if you're busy," he said stiffly. "You already did," Elena replied calmly, then gestured toward the chair. "But you might as well sit." Whitman hesitated before lowering himself into the chair. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Finally, you could have told me," he said. Elena took a sip of coffee and grimaced at the bitterness. "Would it have changed anything?" Whitman didn't answer immediately. "You challenged me," he said instead, "in front of my staff." "I challenged a decision," Elena replied. "Not you." Whitman laughed humorlessly. "You don't see the difference I do," she said. "That's why I waited as long as I did." That landed harder than Whitman expected. "You let it happen," he said quietly. "You let me ban you." "Yes." "Why?" Elena set the cup down. "Because I needed to know if this place could survive without me being special." Whitman looked up sharply. "Special? I don't want authority here," Elena said. "I want function, trust, the kind that doesn't collapse when a title leaves the room." Whitman ran a hand through his hair. "You think I don't care about that? I think," Elena said gently, "that you've confused control with safety." The words stung because they rang true. Whitman stood abruptly. "You made me look like a fool." Elena met his gaze. "No, you did that when you stopped listening." Silence stretched between them. Outside the lounge, footsteps approached. Hargrove appeared in the doorway, glancing between them. "We need a moment, Dr. Carter," he said. Elena nodded and followed him into the hall. They walked toward a quiet, administrative corridor away from prying eyes. "You handled that well," Hargrove said. "Eliminating variables tends to do that," Elena replied. He smiled faintly. "You always did hate chaos." "I hated preventable chaos," she corrected. Hargrove stopped near a window overlooking the parking structure. "This isn't over. I know. There will be a review," he continued. "Questions. Documentation. People who want to understand why NORAD has an interest in a trauma physician working a civilian ER." Elena folded her arms. And some of those people won't be as discreet as I am." Elena nodded slowly. "Then we keep it narrow." Hargrove studied her. "You're still trying to stay small." "I'm trying to stay useful," she said. He sighed. "You saved a life today. So did everyone else in that room." "Yes," he agreed. "But you did it after being told you didn't belong there." Elena's jaw tightened. "Belonging is irrelevant, is it?" Hargrove asked softly. Before she could answer, an alarm sounded from down the hall, not urgent but insistent. A nurse hurried past them. "Dr. Carter, we've got another incoming. High-speed rollover. Too critical." Elena didn't hesitate. She turned back toward the ER, already mentally mapping priorities. Behind her, Hargrove watched her go, concern etched deeper than before. Back in the trauma bay, the doors burst open again. New patients, new variables, new chances for things to go wrong. Whitman stood at the edge of the room, uncertain. Elena caught his eye. "Stay," she said simply. Whitman hesitated, then stepped inside. For the first time, he didn't take command. He followed. As the team moved, as orders flowed and hands worked in unison, something fragile began to form. An uneasy truce built not on titles, but on shared responsibility. But even as the ER found its rhythm again, unseen forces were already aligning beyond the hospital walls. Because somewhere far from street, Catherine's in rooms without windows and conversations without records, Elena Carter's name was being spoken again. And not everyone was pleased that she'd been found. The second rollover victims arrived within minutes of each other, metal and glass still clinging to their clothes, the smell of gasoline and burned rubber trailing behind them like a warning. Trauma Bay 1 and 2 filled again, but this time the movement felt different, less frantic, more deliberate. Elena stood at the center not as a commander, but as an anchor. "Primary survey," she said. "Talk to me. Airway, breathing, circulation." The words weren't barked, they were invitations pulling the team into alignment. Whitman hovered near the monitors, silent, absorbing the rhythm rather than imposing one. The first patient stabilized quickly. The second didn't. Blood pressure dropped. Pupils dilated unevenly. A hidden bleed revealed itself too late on imaging. "We're losing him," a resident said. Elena's gaze flicked to the clock. "We've got 5 minutes before we don't." She gave a sequence of instructions that cut across specialties: surgical, respiratory, pharmacological, precise and unapologetic. No one questioned her now. They moved. Outside the bay, Hargrove stood with his 2 escorts, watching through the glass. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. He didn't look at it. Inside, Elena made a call. Most civilian ER physicians never had to make a controlled risk that balanced organ failure against immediate survival. It was the kind of decision drilled into her years ago in simulations designed around worst-case scenarios that never made the news. "Do it," she said. The resident hesitated. "If this goes wrong..." "It already has," Elena replied. "This gives him a chance." They acted. Seconds stretched thin. Then slowly the numbers climbed. Not much, just enough. "He's responding," someone whispered. Elena didn't smile. She nodded once and moved on. When it was over, when both patients were transferred and the trauma bays cleared again, the ER settled into a fragile calm. Staff moved with quieter steps. Voices stayed low, as if the building itself were listening. Whitman removed his gloves with deliberate care. His hands were steady, but his mind was not. He turned to Elena. "You didn't even look at me before making that call." "I didn't need to," she said. "That decision," he stopped choosing his words. "You took responsibility for it." Elena met his eyes. "That's what authority is," she said. "Not permission. Responsibility." Whitman absorbed that in silence. Hargrove stepped inside, then closing the distance between observation and participation. "We need to talk," he said to Elena. "Privately." Whitman started to follow, then stopped when Hargrove raised a hand. "Not this one," Hargrove said. Whitman nodded stiffly and stayed behind as they walked toward the quieter end of the corridor. Hargrove didn't speak until they reached a windowless office, the kind reserved for audits and uncomfortable conversations. He closed the door behind them. "The call you got earlier," he said, "wasn't the only one made today." Elena leaned against the table. "I assumed as much. Your presence here was flagged weeks ago," Hargrove continued. "Not by us. By another branch." Elena's expression tightened. "Which one?" Hargrove hesitated. "That's classified." "Then don't bring it up," she said flatly. "I'm bringing it up because they're not happy," he replied. "You were supposed to stay off-grid. Low visibility. Temporary." "I didn't choose the crash," Elena said. "I didn't choose Whitman's ego." "No," Hargrove agreed. "But you chose to intervene." "Yes," Elena said. "And I'd do it again." Hargrove studied her. "That choice has consequences." Elena straightened. "So does not making it." Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. "They want you reassigned," Hargrove said finally. Pulled out. Quietly. Elena exhaled slowly. "That would compromise the hospital." It would simplify the situation, he countered. For whom? For everyone who doesn't want to answer questions about why NORAD assets are embedded in civilian trauma centers. Elena's eyes hardened. I'm not an asset. Hargrove didn't argue. I know. A knock sounded at the door. One of Hargrove's escorts leaned in. Sir, we've got confirmation. Another inquiry just came through Defense Oversight. Elena closed her eyes briefly. That was fast. Hargrove nodded. Faster than I'd like. They stepped back into the hallway together. The ER staff watched them pass, sensing the tension, even without understanding it. Whitman stood near the nurse's station posture, rigid eyes tracking Elena. She stopped beside him. You're about to lose control of this situation again, she said quietly. Whitman bristled. I thought we were past. We are, Elena said. This isn't about you. That didn't reassure him. What's happening, he asked. Elena chose her words carefully. There are people who don't like that I exist where I do, or that I act without asking them first. Whitman scoffed. Welcome to hospital politics. She looked at him. These aren't politics. Before he could respond, Hargrove's phone rang. He answered it immediately. Yes, he said. She's here. A pause. No, Hargrove said slowly. That's not accurate. Another pause. Longer. I understand your concern, Hargrove continued, but removing her now would create more exposure, not less. Whitman watched Hargrove's face tighten. Yes, Hargrove said. I'm aware of the optics. He listened, jaw clenched, then ended the call. They want a statement, Hargrove said to Elena. Official. On record. Elena's shoulders squared. About what? About your role, your authority, and whether today's intervention was sanctioned. Whitman stepped closer. If this turns into a federal investigation, it already is, Hargrove said. The ER seemed to hold its breath again. Elena looked around at the staff, the nurses who had trusted her, the residents who had followed her lead, the patients who would never know how close they'd come to becoming collateral damage. Give them the statement, she said. Hargrove raised an eyebrow. You know what that means? Yes, Elena replied. It means I stop hiding. Whitman felt a chill, and if they don't like what they hear, Elena met his gaze, calm as ever. Then they'll have to explain why saving lives was inconvenient. Hargrove studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. He gestured toward the administrative wing. Let's make it official. As they walked away, Whitman remained where he was, the weight of the day finally settling into his bones. He had spent years guarding his authority like a fortress. Now he realized it had never been the strongest structure in the room. Behind the scenes, calls were being logged, names recorded, decisions escalated beyond hospital walls. The quiet standoff Elena had tried to maintain was ending. The next move wouldn't happen in the trauma bay. It would happen in rooms far removed from blood and monitors where consequences were measured not in heartbeats but in careers. The administrative conference room was colder than the rest of the hospital. Not in temperature, though. The air conditioning hummed a little too loudly, but in feeling. The walls were bare, the tables scarred by years of closed-door meetings where decisions were made and responsibility was often diluted by paperwork. Elena Carter sat at one end of the table, hands folded, posture straight. Hargrove stood near the window phone, pressed to his ear, speaking in low, measured tones that revealed nothing to anyone listening from the outside. Whitman took the chair farthest from her. He hadn't been told to leave. He hadn't been invited to stay either. He remained because he didn't yet understand whether this was still his hospital or something else entirely. Hargrove ended the call and turned back to them. They're opening a formal inquiry, he said. Limited scope. For now. For now, Whitman repeated. Hargrove nodded. They want a recorded statement. Joint. Whitman frowned. Joint. You were the decision-maker who restricted access, Hargrove said, and she was the one who overrode the practical outcome of that decision. They want context from both sides. Whitman stiffened. I didn't override anything. I enforced protocol. Elena didn't react. That distinction, Hargrove said calmly, is about to be examined under a very different lens. A tablet was placed on the table, its screen already lit. A red indicator pulsed softly in the corner. Once we begin, Hargrove said, this goes on record. It won't be public, but it will be permanent. Whitman swallowed. Elena nodded once. Let's do it. Hargrove activated the recording. State your name and role, the voice instructed. Dr. Harold Whitman, Whitman said. Emergency Room Director, Street, Catherine's Medical Center. Elena Carter, she followed. Attending Physician, Emergency Medicine. Dr. Whitman, the voice continued. Describe the events leading to the restriction of Dr. Carter's access to the trauma bay. Whitman cleared his throat. He spoke carefully at first, outlining concerns about chain-of-command protocol adherence and departmental authority. He chose words he had used many times before, phrases that sounded reasonable when spoken aloud. As he talked, Elena watched him not with resentment but with an unsettling patience. And when Dr. Carter objected, the voice asked. She challenged my assessment, Whitman said, in a high-pressure environment. Did her assessment prove accurate? Whitman hesitated. Yes, he admitted. In hindsight. The pause stretched. Dr. Carter, the voice said. Why did you intervene despite being restricted? Elena didn't hesitate. Because the patient was going to die, she said, and because I knew exactly why. Whitman turned to her sharply, but she didn't look back. Explain, the voice requested. Elena detailed the physiological markers, the missed signs, the timeline. She spoke clinically, dispassionately. She didn't reference her past. She didn't reference NORAD. She focused only on what had happened in that room. And your authority to make such determinations, the voice asked. I don't need authority to recognize a failing airway, Elena said. Only responsibility to act. Silence followed. The red indicator continued blinking. Thank you, the voice said finally. We will review. The tablet went dark. Whitman exhaled, shoulders slumping slightly. That's it, for now, Hargrove said again. Whitman rubbed his temples. You're telling me my judgment is going to be dissected by people who've never set foot in an ER? Yes, Hargrove replied, just like hers has been for years. Whitman looked at Elena. Is that true? She met his gaze. Every decision I've made in the last decade has been reviewed by someone who wasn't there. Whitman laughed softly, bitterly. That's insane. That's accountability, Elena said. Before he could respond, Hargrove's phone rang again. He glanced at the screen and frowned. This isn't good, he answered, listening in silence. His expression tightened, then hardened. No, he said. That's not acceptable. A pause. I don't care what your concerns are. Removing her now would compromise patient safety. Another pause. I'm fully aware of the implications. He ended the call and turned to Elena. They want you off the floor, he said. Immediately. Administrative hold. Whitman shot to his feet. You can't be serious. She's the reason those patients are alive. That's not the argument they're making, Hargrove replied. They're worried about exposure. Elena stood slowly. If I leave now, she said, someone else dies tonight. Hargrove met her eyes. I know. Whitman looked between them. Then say no. Hargrove shook his head. This isn't my call. Elena considered that. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a thin, unmarked folder. She placed it on the table. What's that? Whitman asked. Elena opened it. Inside were documents. Whitman couldn't fully understand authorization codes, contingency, language signatures he recognized only from news articles and whispered rumors. Hargrove inhaled sharply. You weren't supposed to use that, he said. I wasn't supposed to need it, Elena replied. Whitman stared. What am I looking at? A standing medical continuity directive, Elena said, issued under national emergency provisions. Whitman's blood ran cold. Emergency, not, declared Elena, clarified. Prepared. Hargrove closed his eyes briefly. If you invoke this, they can't pull me, Elena said, not without explaining why. Hargrove nodded slowly. You're forcing their hand. I'm protecting this hospital, she said, and your patients. Whitman felt something inside him shift again, something final. You'd risk your career for this, he asked quietly. Elena looked at him. I already did. Hargrove exhaled. All right, he said. If you do this, the fallout will be severe. Elena didn't flinch. So will the alternative. Hargrove made another call, voice clipped, precise. He cited clauses. He named sections. He invoked language that made Whitman's head spin. When he ended the call, the room was silent. They can't remove you, Hargrove said. Not tonight. Elena nodded. Good. Whitman sank back into his chair, stunned. You just went to war for an ER. Elena gathered her folder. No, she said. I went to work. She turned toward the door. Where are you going? Whitman asked. Elena paused. Back to the trauma bay, she said, where I should have been all along. As she left, Whitman remained seated, staring at the closed door. For the first time in his career, he understood something terrifying. Authority didn't come from the title on his coat. It came from the willingness to bear consequences, and Elena Carter had just shown him how heavy those could be. The trauma bay doors swung open again, and this time no one questioned why Elena Carter was there. The room didn't pause. It didn't stiffen. It simply adjusted like a system correcting itself after a long imbalance. Incoming ETA. 2 minutes, a paramedic's voice crackled over the radio. Single patient. High-speed motorcycle crash. Helmet compromised. Suspected head trauma, internal bleeding. Elena was already moving. Prep Bay 1, she said. Neuro and vascular on standby. Blood ready, type O, full units. Whitman stood off to the side, watching her work with a strange mix of relief and dread. He knew now that every decision she made carried weight far beyond the hospital walls. And yet, in this room, none of that mattered. Only the patient did. The gurney burst through the doors moments later. The man was young, early 20s maybe. Blood matted his hair. His chest rose shallowly, unevenly. One pupil was blown wide. GCS 6, a resident reported. BP 80/40. Elena leaned in, eyes sharp. He's herniating. We don't have time. Whitman felt his pulse spike. CT first, he said reflexively. Elena didn't look at him. We'll lose him on the way. Whitman hesitated. Every protocol he'd memorized screamed at him to insist, to assert, to remind her who held final authority. Instead, he swallowed. Do what you need to do, he said. Elena nodded once. She took control, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Hands moved where she pointed. Orders flowed cleanly. The chaos that usually accompanied severe head trauma never fully formed. It was strangled in its infancy by decisiveness. As they worked, Whitman noticed something else. The room trusted her, not because of the helicopter, not because of NORAD, but because she made sense when nothing else did. Pressure's dropping, the nurse said. Clamp there, Elena replied. Now. They did. The bleeding slowed. Seconds passed, then minutes. Finally, the patient stabilized enough for transport. Ore is ready, someone called. Elena exhaled slowly. Good. Let's move. As they wheeled the gurney out, Whitman caught up to her. You just bypassed 3 layers of approval, he said quietly. Yes, she replied. If this goes wrong, I'll answer for it, Elena said, finally meeting his eyes. Not you. That more than anything broke something open inside him. The OR doors closed behind the patient. The immediate crisis ebbed, leaving behind the aftershock, the realization of how close they'd come to disaster. Whitman stepped back, leaning against the wall. His legs felt unsteady. Hargrove approached him, expression unreadable. She invoked the directive, Whitman said. Yes. And you let her? Yes. Whitman laughed under his breath. You know what that means for me. Hargrove studied him. It means you have a choice. Whitman looked up sharply. A choice. You can dig in, Hargrove said. Fight this. Frame it as insubordination. Protect your title. And the other option, you can acknowledge that you were wrong, Hargrove replied, and become part of the solution. Whitman stared down the corridor where Elena had disappeared. I spent 20 years building this department, he said quietly. I thought control was the same as leadership. Hargrove said nothing. I was wrong, Whitman continued, and someone almost died because of it. Hargrove nodded. That's what the review will focus on. Whitman stiffened. The review. Yes, Hargrove said. It's already moving. As if summoned by his words, 2 unfamiliar figures stepped into the ER, both wearing suits, both carrying folders thick with paper. They scanned the room, then approached Hargrove. Mr. Hargrove, one of them said. Defense oversight. Hargrove inclined his head. Gentlemen. They turned their attention to Whitman. Dr. Whitman, the other said. We'll need to speak with you. Whitman straightened his coat, heart pounding. About what he asked, though he already knew. About your decision to restrict a federally protected medical responder during an active trauma incident, the man replied evenly. Whitman glanced down the hall once more. Elena emerged from the OR corridor just then, removing her gloves, exhaustion finally visible in the lines of her face. The patient had survived surgery. She saw the suits. She saw Whitman standing between them and Hargrove. She understood immediately. Elena walked over. "This is on me," she said calmly. Any restriction was mine to override. One of the men turned to her. "Dr. Carter, your involvement is already documented." Whitman looked at her stunned. "You don't have to do this." "Yes," she said quietly. "I do." She turned back to the officials. "But before you proceed, you should know something." They waited. If Dr. Whitman hadn't stepped aside when it mattered, Elena continued, the patient in OR3 would be dead. The corridor went silent. That decision, she said, was his. Whitman felt his throat tighten. The officials exchanged glances. "We'll take that under advisement," one of them said. They turned back to Whitman. "We'll need your statement." Whitman nodded. "You'll have it." As they walked away, Whitman exhaled shakily. "You didn't have to protect me," he said to Elena. "I didn't," she replied. "I told the truth." He studied her. "Why? Because accountability isn't about punishment," Elena said. "It's about learning who you are when it costs something." Whitman nodded slowly. The ER resumed its rhythm around them, patients arriving, nurses moving lives, intersecting in quiet, relentless motion. But beneath it all, something had changed. The authority Whitman once clung to so tightly now felt different, less like a shield, more like a responsibility he'd neglected. And Elena Carter, standing there in blood-spattered scrubs, had just forced the system to look at itself. The climax had passed, but the consequences were only beginning to land. The waiting was worse than the chaos. Once the immediate emergencies had passed, once the gurneys stopped rushing through the doors, and the alarms settled back into their steady mechanical cadence, the ER entered a phase that no protocol prepared anyone for suspension. Whitman sat in his office, the door half closed, his hands resting on the desk without touching anything. Across from him, the two defense oversight officials reviewed their notes in silence. They hadn't raised their voices. They hadn't accused him of anything outright. That restraint unsettled him more than anger ever could. "Dr. Whitman," one of them said, "finally, walk us through your decision-making process again." From the beginning, Whitman inhaled slowly and started over. He spoke of hierarchy, of protocol, of the need to maintain order in a high-risk environment. He explained how Elena's presence, her quiet authority, her influence without title had felt destabilizing. "And when you restricted her access," the man asked. "I believed I was protecting the department," Whitman said. "And when the patient deteriorated," the other asked. Whitman closed his eyes briefly. "I believed I was still right." The silence that followed was long and deliberate. "Belief," the first man said at last, "is not a substitute for judgment." Whitman nodded. "I know that now." Down the hall, Elena leaned against the wall outside the OR, exhaustion finally claiming ground. Her hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline drained away a delayed reaction she'd learned to recognize and manage. Hargrove stood nearby, watching her carefully. "You're running on fumes," he said. "I've been worse," Elena replied. "That's not a compliment." She smiled faintly. "I know." A nurse approached hesitantly. "Dr. Carter, the patient from OR3, he's stable. Neurosurgery says he has a real chance." Elena closed her eyes, relief flickering across her face for just a moment. "Thank you." The nurse lingered. "For what it's worth. We're glad you're here." Elena nodded, accepting the words without ceremony. Across the ER, conversations shifted. Staff spoke more carefully now, not because of fear but awareness. They had seen the chain of authority bend under pressure, had watched truth reassert itself when hierarchy failed, and they were still processing it. Hargrove's phone buzzed again. He checked it and grimaced. "They're escalating," he said. Elena didn't ask who. "They want to formalize your status," Hargrove continued. "Either embed you officially or remove you completely." Elena straightened. "Embedded means oversight. Restrictions." "Yes. And removal means the hospital loses a resource it didn't know it needed." "Yes." Hargrove met her gaze. "They're framing it as risk management." Elena scoffed softly. "Of course they are." At that moment, Whitman stepped out of his office. His shoulders looked heavier than they had that morning. He walked toward them, stopping a few feet away. "They're done with me," he said. Hargrove raised an eyebrow. "That was quick." "They didn't remove me," Whitman clarified. "But they made something very clear." Elena waited. "My authority doesn't shield me from consequence," Whitman continued. "And it won't shield this hospital if we pretend today didn't happen." Elena studied him. "And what are you going to do?" Whitman exhaled. "I'm calling a department-wide briefing. Full transparency." Hargrove frowned. "That may complicate." "It will," Whitman agreed, "but hiding it will be worse." Elena nodded slowly. "You're right." Within the hour, the ER staff gathered in the main corridor, nurses, residents, attendings, techs. The hum of machines continued around them, but the space felt different, charged with anticipation. Whitman stood at the front. "I made a mistake today," he said plainly. The words sent a ripple through the crowd. "I allowed my concern for control to override my responsibility to listen," he continued. "And someone almost paid for it with their life." No one spoke. "Dr. Carter intervened when I failed to," Whitman said, "and she did so knowing the cost." Elena felt eyes turn toward her. "I restricted her access because I felt threatened," Whitman said, "not because she was wrong." A murmur spread. Whitman raised a hand. "This department doesn't function on titles alone. It functions on trust. And today, trust saved a life." He stepped back. Silence followed, then a quiet collective shift. Heads nodded, shoulders straightened. Something unspoken but real settled into place. Afterward, as staff dispersed, Elena felt the weight of attention lift slightly. She wasn't invisible anymore, but she wasn't isolated either. Hargrove approached her again. "The oversight team wants your answer," he said. "Embed or exit." Elena looked down the corridor where patients waited, where monitors beeped, where chaos would return, as it always did. "Embedding means they'll watch every move I make," she said. "Yes, and exiting means this place goes back to what it was." "Probably." Elena closed her eyes, then opened them. "I'll embed," she said, "on one condition." Hargrove waited. "I don't answer to politics in this building," she continued, "only to patient outcomes." Hargrove smiled faintly. "That's going to make you unpopular." "I'm used to that." He nodded. "I'll relay it." As he walked away, Whitman stepped beside her. "You didn't have to stay," he said quietly. "Yes," Elena replied. "I did." Whitman glanced around the ER, the place he'd tried so hard to control. "I thought leadership meant never being questioned," he said. "Turns out it means knowing when you're wrong." Elena looked at him. "It means knowing when to step aside." Whitman nodded. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the hospital windows. The day's crisis was ending, not with sirens or helicopters, but with something quieter. Change. And though the trauma bay doors would open again and the pressure would return, the lines of authority inside Street Catherine's had been redrawn, not by force, but by truth spoken under fire. The hospital felt different the next morning. Not quieter. ERs were never quiet, but steadier, as if the building itself had exhaled after holding tension in its walls all night. Sunlight filtered through the upper windows, catching on polished floors and stainless steel rails. Night shift handed off to day shift, with fewer sharp edges, fewer clipped exchanges. Elena Carter arrived before her scheduled time. She always did after nights like the one they'd survived. Her badge scanned green at every door now. No hesitation, no delay. The trauma bay recognized her again, not as an exception, not as a problem to be managed, but as part of its functioning core. Whitman stood near the central desk reviewing charts. He looked up when he saw her. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Elena replied. The word felt ordinary, that somehow felt like progress. Overnight, the Defense Oversight Team had completed their preliminary review. No press, no public statements. But the consequences were already unfolding in quieter ways. Whitman had been placed under administrative review, not suspended, not removed, but required to undergo external leadership evaluation. It was a measured response, one that cut deeper than a headline ever could. He accepted it without protest. At 9 o'clock, Hargrove arrived again, no helicopter this time. He walked in through the front entrance like any other visitor, carrying nothing but a slim folder and the weight of decisions that would ripple far beyond this hospital. "Elena," he said, nodding to her. Dr. Whitman. Mr. Hargrove, Whitman replied. They stepped into the same conference room as before. It looked unchanged, but the power dynamic inside it had shifted permanently. Hargrove placed the folder on the table. This formalizes the arrangement, he said. Embedded status, limited visibility, conditional autonomy. Whitman scanned the document. Conditional Hargrove met his eyes. On patient outcomes. Whitman nodded slowly. Fair. Elena read the document carefully. She didn't rush. She never did with things that mattered. You're giving me authority without rank, she said. Yes, Hargrove replied, and oversight without interference. She looked up. That balance won't last. No, Hargrove agreed, but it will last long enough. She signed. The pen felt heavier than it should have. With that stroke, Elena Carter became something that made bureaucrats uncomfortable, a bridge between civilian medicine and national contingency planning. Not visible enough to invite scrutiny, not hidden enough to be ignored. Exactly where she'd always been most effective. When they returned to the ER, the shift was already in motion. A stroke alert came in. A cardiac arrest followed minutes later. The work didn't pause to acknowledge yesterday's drama. It never did. Elena stepped back into the flow, issuing guidance when needed, stepping aside when not. She didn't take command. She didn't retreat either. She adjusted. Whitman watched her from a distance. He saw how people approached her now, not with awe, not with fear, but with trust. The kind that came from consistency, not authority. From someone who didn't need to prove anything. He wondered how many times he'd mistaken silence for weakness. Late that afternoon, he found her in the supply room, restocking a tray with quiet efficiency. I owe you an apology, he said. Elena didn't look up. You already gave one. That was public, Whitman replied. This is personal. She paused, then met his eyes. I didn't listen, he continued. Not because you were wrong, but because I didn't want to be. Elena considered that. That's more common than you think. I thought if I gave ground, I'd lose everything, Whitman said. Turns out I was already losing it. Elena nodded. Control feels safer than trust. Until it isn't. Whitman exhaled. I don't know if I can become the kind of leader you are. You don't need to, she replied. You just need to become the kind who listens sooner. That somehow felt harder. As evening approached, the hospital settled into its next cycle. Patients arrived. Others left. Life continued in its relentless, indifferent way. Hargrove found Elena near the ambulance bay, watching the sun dip low over the city. They'll watch you closely, he said. Every move. They always do, she replied. You could still walk away, he added. Take a role where the lines are clearer. Elena shook her head. Clear lines don't save lives. People do. Hargrove smiled faintly. You're going to make a lot of powerful enemies. I already have, she said. They just didn't know my name before. He extended his hand. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. She shook it. I usually do. When he left, Elena remained where she was, listening to the distant sounds of sirens weaving through the city. Somewhere out there, another crisis was forming. Another moment when decisions would matter more than titles. Back inside, Whitman called a brief leadership meeting, not to assert control, but to recalibrate it. He delegated more. He asked questions he'd never asked before. The department responded, not perfectly, not instantly, but honestly. As night fell, Elena returned to the trauma bay one last time before her shift ended. She checked on the patients from the day before. The motorcyclist was awake, confused, alive. The rollover victims were stable. She stood quietly at the foot of the bed, unseen, unacknowledged, just the way she preferred it. But as she turned to leave, the patient's mother caught her eye. Are you the doctor who stayed? The woman asked softly. Elena hesitated. I was part of the team. The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. Thank you for not leaving. Elena swallowed. You're welcome. She stepped out into the hall, the words echoing louder than any helicopter ever had. Thank you for not leaving. For years, Elena Carter had learned how to disappear when necessary. How to work in shadows, how to let others take credit, how to move without being seen. But this place, this hospital, had changed the equation. Here, staying mattered. And tomorrow the real test would begin, not in crisis, not under fire, but in the slow, difficult work of building something better from the quiet aftermath of truth. The night shift returned the ER to its familiar rhythm, fluorescent lights, humming monitors, blinking footsteps echoing down long corridors that never truly rested. For most of the staff, yesterday had already begun to blur into memory, filed away as one of those days, unusual, intense, but ultimately survived. For Elena Carter, it settled differently. She stood at the edge of the trauma bay, chart in hand, watching a young resident carefully suture a laceration under supervision. The resident's hands trembled slightly. Elena didn't intervene. She waited. "Take your time," she said softly. "Precision first. Speed comes later." The resident nodded, steadied, and continued. Whitman observed from a few feet away. He no longer stood at the center. That change was intentional. Over the next several days, the ER adjusted subtly at first, then unmistakably. Decisions were still made quickly, but fewer voices fought for dominance. Consults happened earlier. Questions were welcomed instead of interpreted as challenges. Whitman noticed something else too. Mistakes were being caught sooner, not because people were more careful, but because they were less afraid. During one morning briefing, a junior nurse spoke up about a medication dosage that didn't seem right. In the past, the comment might have been brushed aside. This time it stopped the room. The dosage was corrected. No one died. Whitman looked across the room and caught Elena's eye. She gave a small nod, not approval, not pride, just recognition. Later that afternoon, a representative from hospital administration arrived, civilian, polished, cautious. He requested a private meeting with Whitman and Elena. "I'll be direct," the administrator said, once they were seated. Yesterday's incident raised concerns at the board level. Whitman straightened. "About patient safety, about exposure," the man replied. Elena said nothing. "There's unease," the administrator continued, "about overlapping authorities. About federal interest." Whitman glanced at Elena, then back at the man. "Our outcomes have improved." "Yes," the administrator conceded. "But perception matters." Elena finally spoke. "So do lives." The administrator shifted uncomfortably. "We're not questioning your competence, Dr. Carter. You're questioning my presence," she replied evenly. The man hesitated. "We're questioning whether it's sustainable." Whitman leaned forward. "It is," the administrator blinked. "Excuse me, it is sustainable," Whitman repeated, "because the alternative isn't acceptable." The words surprised even Whitman himself. Elena looked at him not with gratitude, but with something closer to respect. The administrator sighed. "The board will want assurances. They'll get results," Whitman said. "And transparency." After the man left, silence filled the room. "You didn't have to do that," Elena said. "Yes," Whitman replied. "I did." That evening, Elena prepared to leave after a double shift. She changed out of her scrubs slowly, muscles aching, mind heavy in the way it only did after something truly ended. As she stepped into the parking garage, the air felt cooler. The city lights flickered on in the distance. No helicopters, no officials waiting, just quiet. Her phone buzzed once. A message from an encrypted contact. "You stabilized the situation." For now, Elena stared at the screen. For now was a phrase she knew well. She typed a brief response. "Hospital secure, patients safe, mission ongoing." She slipped the phone back into her pocket and leaned against her car, letting the fatigue finally catch up with her. Inside the hospital, Whitman remained behind, reviewing reports. He paused at one chart, the first patient from the chemical exposure incident. Alive, recovering. He closed the file and leaned back in his chair. For years he had believed leadership meant standing firm against pressure. Yesterday had taught him something harder, that real leadership meant yielding to truth when it arrived, even if it arrived through someone you had tried to silence. The ER continued its work through the night. Lives were saved quietly. Losses were mourned quietly too. No one called NORAD again. No helicopters landed on the roof. But the echo of that call remained not as fear, but as a reminder. Power, when misused, endangered lives. Silence, when chosen wisely, could save them. A week later, Elena stood once more at the edge of the trauma bay, watching the same resident from before confidently lead a procedure under supervision. The tremor in his hands was gone. He looked up at her. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" she asked. "For staying," he replied. Elena nodded once. That night, as she walked down the corridor toward the exit, the lights dimmed automatically behind her. The ER hummed on, indifferent to heroes, indifferent to titles. Exactly as it should. Because the most important work was never about who stood at the center when the world was watching. It was about who remained when no one was. Some people believe authority comes from titles, offices, or the power to give orders. But real authority, the kind that saves lives, comes from responsibility and the courage to act when it matters most. Elena Carter never needed recognition. She needed room to do what was right, and when that space was denied, she chose consequence over comfort, truth over safety, and lives over pride. In every workplace, in every crisis, there comes a moment when silence becomes a decision, when choosing not to act is just as powerful as choosing to step forward. What defines us isn't how loudly we speak, but whether we're willing to stand firm when the cost is real. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? And if you believe stories like this matter, stories about courage, humility, and quiet justice, make sure to subscribe for more.